Section 4 of The Sandman, His Farm Stories. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Sandman, His Farm Stories by William John Hopkins. The Whole Wheat Story. Once upon a time there was a farmhouse, and it was painted white and had green blinds, and it stood not far from the road. And in the fence was a wide gate to let the wagons through to the barn. And the wagons, going through, had made a little track that went up past the kitchen door, and past the shed, and past the barn, and past the orchard, to a gate in a stone wall where the bars were across. And through that field, and another gate where the bars were across, into the maple sugar woods. And in that field wheat grew. When the summer was nearly over, and the corn and most of the other things had got ripe and had been gathered, Uncle John got out the old oxen, and put the yoke over their necks, and the bows up under. And he hooked the drag chain to the yoke, and put the plough on the drag, and said, "Gee up there, Buck! Gee up there, Star!" And the old oxen started slowly along past the barn, and past the orchard to the wheat field. Then Uncle John took the plough off the drag, and unhooked the chain from the drag, and hooked it to the plough. Uncle Solomon held the handles of the plough, and the old oxen started walking slowly across the field, dragging the plough. And the plough dug into the ground and turned the earth up at one side, and made a deep furrow where it had gone. So they went all around the field, and around until it was all ploughed. Then Uncle John unhooked the chain from the plough, and hooked it to the harrow. And the old oxen started and walked slowly back and forth across the field, and the teeth of the harrow broke up the lumps of dirt and made it all soft. And when the field was all harrowed, Uncle John unhooked the chain from the harrow and hooked it to the drag, and put the plough on the drag, and the old oxen walked slowly back to the barn. And Uncle John unhooked the chain and took off the yoke, and the oxen went to their places in the barn and went to sleep, and the drag was in the shed. The next morning Uncle John put some whole wheat in a big bag, and put the bag over his shoulder, and walked along past the orchard to the wheat field. And when he got to the wheat field, he put the bag down on the ground, and put some of the wheat in a little bag that he had hanging from his shoulder. And then he began walking across the field, and as he walked along, he took up a handful of wheat, and threw it far out so that it scattered over the ground. And that way he scattered all the wheat so that it lay in the soft ground. And then he went away and left it. And the rain fell, and the sun shone on the field, and the wheat began to grow. And soon the little green blades pushed up through the ground like grass, and the wheat grew higher and higher until it was as high as little John's knees. And then the summer was all over, and it was beginning to get cold. So the wheat stopped growing and stayed just as high as that all winter, and the snow covered it. And when the winter was over and it began to get warm, the snow melted away and the wheat began to grow again, and it got taller and taller until it was as tall as Uncle John's waist. And then the little tassels at the top of each stem got yellow and brown, and the wheat was ripe. This was the beginning of the summer. Then Uncle John and Uncle Solomon got their scythes and their whetstones, and started very early in the morning to the wheat field. And they sharpened their scythes with the whetstones, and swung the scythes back and forth, and began to cut down the wheat. Every time the scythe swung, It cut through the stalks of wheat, and they fell down on the ground. And they walked along over the field, swinging the scythes and cutting down wheat until all the wheat was cut. Then they went home and left it lying there in the sun. The next morning, Uncle John got out the oxen, and they put their heads down low, and he put the yoke over and the bows under, and hooked the tongue of the cart to the yoke, and said, "Gee up there!" And the old oxen walked slowly along, past the barn, and past the orchard to the wheat field. And the sun had dried the stalks of wheat and the tassels. The tassels are a lot of little cases on a fine stem, and in each little case is a grain of whole wheat. When the tassels are dry, the little cases are all ready to break open. Then Uncle Solomon and Uncle John took their long forks and put the wheat in the cart. And when the cart was full, the old oxen walked slowly back to the barn and in at the great doors. There were great enormous doors in the side of the barn, big enough for a wagon to go through when it was piled up high with a load of hay or of wheat. And in the other side of the barn were other great enormous doors, so that the wagon could go right through the barn, and between the doors was only the great open floor with nothing on it. On one side of this open place were the cows, and on the other side were the horses and the oxen, and the cart went in between with the wheat in it. Then Uncle Solomon and Uncle John took the wheat out of the cart and put it on the floor of the barn, and the old oxen started again and walked out the other door and back to the wheat field. Then Uncle Solomon and Uncle John filled the cart again, and the oxen dragged that wheat to the barn, and they did the same way until all the wheat was on the barn floor. Then Uncle John took off the yoke, and the old oxen went to their places and went to sleep. The next morning, Uncle Solomon and Uncle John went to the barn, and each took down from a nail a long smooth stick that had another smooth stick fastened to its end by a piece of leather so that it flapped about. This was to beat the wheat with, and they called it a flail. And so Uncle Solomon and Uncle John stood in amidst the wheat on the barn floor and whacked it with the flails so that they made a great noise, whack, whack, on the floor. And the little cases broke open, and the grains of whole wheat fell out and dropped between the stalks to the barn floor. And the pieces of the broken cases blew out from the great barn doors, for the doors were open at both sides and the wind blew through. These broken pieces that blow away they call chaff. Then when Uncle Solomon and Uncle John had whacked for a long time, and they thought that all the whole wheat had come out of the cases, they hung up the flails and took their long forks and lifted up the stalks of the wheat and shook them, so that all the grains of wheat might drop through. And they put the dried stalks of the wheat in a corner of the hayloft above where the cows slept. These dried stalks they call straw, and they put it for the horses and the cows and the oxen to sleep on. And when the straw was all put away, there was all the wheat on the floor, and they gathered it up and put it into bags. And they had enough to make whole wheat flour to last all winter, and to feed the chickens and every kind of thing that they wanted to use wheat for, and there was enough to take some to market besides. And that's all. End of section 4, read by Bookbard.